You're listening to the Savoir Faire Audio Experience.
Are you ready?
The Savoir Faire Experience is your guide to everything that has to do with lifestyle. From dating, rides, style, and entertainment. All brought to you by the editor of Savoir Faire magazine, Robert White. Anything goes on this audio experience. So, let's go.
It's still the best.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Savoir Faire Audio Experience. Thank you guys for listening, following, sharing, and being a part of the show. We appreciate you. Another great interview coming to you today, and I'm real excited about this topic as well because this is something that's actually happening in my world right now. I have some family members that are retiring, and they're trying to figure out what that's going to look like for life. And then I ran into this really great author, Elizabeth Parsons, who wrote a book about this stuff. So, hi, Elizabeth. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming by and talking with me a little bit and talking about your new book. This is definitely a big topic, and I love the idea that you've now written a book about this because I know very clearly some people in my life that have worked their hardest for 50 years of life, and now they've retired potentially, and they're trying to figure out what's that next phase going to look like, and what are we going to do, and how does that all work out? And I think it's super cool that you've analyzed and broken down a lot of this stuff and put it into a really cool book. The book is called Encore. It's available on Amazon and any other place you can buy books. So, Elizabeth, I have questions, and I want to learn a lot about you in this process.
Sure.
Can you talk to me a little bit about your background? I always ask this really kind of fun question with people, and I say, if I had your resume in front of me, what would I learn about you?
Oh, it's great. I love it. Yeah. Well, I have a lot of variety to my background, so it all sort of feeds into it all feeds into this the experience it took to write this book. But sort of to set the stage, I myself pursued a pretty intense career right out of the chute, and went to law school at night, worked full time while I did that, and when I graduated from Georgetown Law, I managed to land a job at one of these sort of international Wall Street firms, and so the work pace was really intense. And the expectations were really high. And, that was all fun and good. And that's what I chose to go do. But 10 years into this 80-hour-a-week, career, I found myself also a mother of two young kids, and just realized the collision of all that was going to be too much to manage. So I, at that point, decided to quote unquote retire from the practice of law, at least in that way. And so around age 35, I just thought, oh, well, I've saved enough money to take a few years off, and I'm going to move to a less expensive market. I left DC, and I just thought, the money was all I needed to really set the stage for the future. And lo and behold, I pulled the trigger on all these changes and realized that I had completely destabilized my identity. I had completely lost track of how the structure of my life was going to work without this huge, intense career driving me constantly. And I was really adrift for a number of years. And it was that experience that helped me begin to see that retiring is about way more than just having the financial security that we're all told we need. And that's very important, of course. But there's so much more that our careers fill in for us. And if you don't think intentionally about how you'll replace those things or rebuild the scaffolding, it can be incredibly destabilizing. So I began that work, as a sort of next career evolution, and have been doing that ever since. But it's important that I do know what it is like to live in that world and walk in those shoes too. So it's sort of interesting, how one thing leads to another.
Yeah, I like that. And so this is kind of unique because the book is called Encore, but it's also the High Achiever's Guide to Thriving in Retirement. And as soon as you gave me your background, I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine that lifestyle. That's definitely, that's a high achiever's guide for, I mean, that's a high achieving position for sure. Just to be in law, be on Wall Street, this huge demand, obviously. And then you decided to have children in the midst of all this stuff too. So that's another layer of just trying to escalate all that. So when you're like super, super busy in life and your job is like the centerpiece of everything, and then you decide to kind of step away, like what kind of emotions and feelings are people kind of analyzing when they've now retired or soft retired or early retirement or whatever the case may be. And they're like, oh, wait a second. Now, how do I fill in this 8 hours in a day or 15 hours in a day that I was committed to this job? Like, what are you kind of learning from that?
Yeah, that is one of the fundamental questions, right? And you would think when people have been going hard, in my case, 10 years, but think of people who've done it 3 or 4 decades, which is most often the client base I have. You have literally become your job. In some ways, you understand yourself first through the lens of what you've done professionally. And the reason is because you spend most of your waking hours doing that. And the way, many of these intense, and it's not just intense careers. I think there are people with more balanced lives who still struggle with this change. But I was coming at it from the angle of a lot of my clients who are, truly people that invested the best parts of themselves often in their jobs. And so to have that disappear, first of all, it can feel like an existential threat to your own identity, to who you are. You think about how we introduce ourselves in this world. Often we tell people first what we do for a living, and that is who we are. I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer at this law firm, or, whatever it is. I'm an athlete. It could be, many professions and many careers have that sense of identity associated with them. So there's that piece that people are grappling with, and sometimes they're not even fully conscious of why they're so uncomfortable with the loss of that, because everyone around them wants to pop the cork in the champagne bottle, right, and say, hey, you made it,
right.
And they're going, oh, I don't know about this. But then the second part is more tactical and practical, which is to your point of, if I'm not spending 12 hours a day working, what in the world am I doing?
Exactly.
Because, when you work that hard, you haven't necessarily built a balanced sort of set of priorities in terms of just the things you would normally invest in, your health, your relationships, your hobbies, your interests, continued learning, even things as basic as your marriage, those things often have to get tucked around the edges of these very busy careers. And so it feels odd to suddenly have that big scaffolding disappear. And then you've got these pieces that don't feel like they have found their right place yet in terms of priority. So those are at least 2 big categories that I would say everybody is confronting in some way or another.
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and it's kind of interesting because I'm not at the age where I'm like old enough to actually physically retire, like, in the 60s potentially, right? What's it, 62 or 63 years old potentially now?
Yeah.
I'm 45, and I have a lot of inspiration to retire at like 55. I really want to just be done grinding. I want to build my company to the point where it can be managed by my children potentially, or it could be, I put people in place and my life can dramatically change so that my days aren't 16 hours anymore. And I think about this stuff even from my own perspective. Like when I do that, that's going to be a great accomplishment. And I'm sure people are going to admire you for you being able to retire a little bit younger than normal and be able to live a life. But like, what am I going to do to fill up that time? I feel like there's always going to have to be some kind of project. Otherwise I'm just going to be losing my mind. Right. Like, so I've seen people that have retired and then health conditions work up because they're not moving around as much. They're not doing certain things. Or some people kind of start grinding into hobbies where, they're spending more time at home, like gardening or something. And then they realize their relationship wasn't all it was cracked up to be because you spent 15 hours of your day away from each other. So like, it's just, it's so many layers to being able to just free up time when you get to that point. So talk to me about the company. I'm really interested in about your guys' focal point, obviously, is your certified retirement coaches. And there's not just you, there's a handful of you. It looks like Have a great team of people. So what is the focus here? Are you kind of helping people before they even get to retirement age, or do I have to retire before I can work with you? What's the process?
Oh, that's a great question. So interestingly, we have several different programs because you've raised an interesting point. I think that it's never too early to be thinking about what the next chapter is about, and so we do have programs. They're usually more group oriented, but where you're thinking about laying the groundwork as far as 10 years out, what am I working toward right now? And let's assume, to your example, you say, look, I've got another decade, and my goal would be to close the current chapter by 55. And I try to get away from this word retire because it suggests that you're suddenly withdrawing into less, that you're retreating or you are wrapping things up in a way that shuts down the idea of expansion and more challenge, more purpose, So I like to say it's another graduation. So if you're thinking forward and saying to yourself, oh, wait, I'm just graduating. I'm graduating from this thing I'm doing now. It's a much more energetic idea, right? Because the moment you graduate, the whole point is, ooh, what's next? Not, oh, it's over, So what we really try to help people do, whether they're 10 years away, 1 year away, or already there living it, is think, energetically about whatever your next chapter is about. What do you want? What would make it spectacular? And it's not pure leisure. That is a mental placeholder that we have in our heads because we've been marketed to about, the golden years of retirement, right? Like it's like, oh, we're just going to sail around the world or play golf. No, that is not an energizing life. I mean, leisure is only interesting when it's in tension with effort and challenge. We need leisure as a break from the effort. But if you have no effort and you're literally just playing, it gets boring real fast. Yeah. And we've seen that over and over with people who say, "Oh, I'm good. I'm just gonna pursue a bunch of fun, frivolous hobbies and do a bunch of traveling and play some golf." I mean, they just in 6 months they're calling and saying, "Oh, this is not good."
Right.
So
right.
It's really, I think it's about identifying purpose and saying, what am I now going to go after, or contribute to, or build, or otherwise effort toward, so that there is something purposeful happening in your life, but you're choosing it. That's the goal with this new chapter, is I get to choose. I don't have to trade my time to pay for my lifestyle anymore. So now, what do I really want? So it's a fun question.
Yeah, I like it. So is it part of your company to be able to get coaching on retirement early, or is that something you ideally want people to be retired and just be in that shock factor when you meet them?
Oh, no. We way prefer early.
Okay, good.
Way prefer. Yeah, getting out in front of it. I mean, it's never too late to get help, of course, right? Like if you find yourself over the bridge going, I'm lost, of course you can get help. But to us, getting intentional about this, even a couple years ahead, is really powerful because you've got time to lay track. You've got time to lay groundwork. You've even got time to think about, how am I going to wrap up what I'm doing now in the best possible way? Like leave on top, wrap it up on top. Like you don't want things to end badly. And that does happen sometimes when people avoid the reality that's coming and they sort of just base jump right out of it. It doesn't always mean they have set things up as nicely as they could have. And that can, the way things end sometimes color the way we see the whole experience. So we think it's important, if you can, to get out in front of this moment, this inflection point, and say, I want to craft it. I want it to be in the best it can be.
Makes sense. Well, let's dive into some of this stuff because I want to, if I have a great retirement coach here, I really don't want to pass up the opportunity to dive into some of these things. So, it just makes sense to kind of pick your brain a little bit. So let's talk about like social connection as one topic, right? So we're at work, we're working with people all day long, we're around people all the time. Now, all of a sudden, our environment is just family because we're retired. And maybe some friends we had from work potentially. So how do you counsel people that are having like lack of social connection? How do you encourage them to kind of do that stuff? What's that key piece?
Absolutely. It's such a huge, huge issue. It's such an important area, and it's probably got the biggest payoff of almost anything you can invest in. So one of the things we help people do right away is to describe, what are all the kinds of relationships that make your relationship world ideal for you. And to your point, usually, of course, your core family members are there. But what's true when those relationships are humming? How would you describe it when it's just right? And usually people will say things like, look, I'd be spending more quality time with, my young adult kids, or I'd be spending more quality time with my spouse. We're always just scheduling, we're always just passing each other in the rush of the day, but we don't make the time to hang out like we used to and things like that. So we say, let's really describe it. Then let's talk about your collaborators. When is that the best for you? Is it a small team? Are you the leader? Are you supporting a leader? Tell us about that. When are you happiest in a collaborative setting? And what parts of that are going to disappear when you retire? Therefore, how do you think about replacing that? When you think about what's next, how do you think about finding new collaborators? Let's get into it and think about how that could look. Then there's this huge category, usually for people, of dormant friendships. People they have lost touch with or just not been in common touch with for decades sometimes. And those are always interesting because they're worried that they're going to reach out now and be rebuffed, because they haven't been reaching out for decades. And we remind them that everybody feels that way. Middle adulthood's busy and you're trying to raise your family, you're trying to, work, but everybody's been in that same boat. So if you're the one who's proactive, you would be surprised how many people are thrilled to hear from you. So we actually recommend people inventory these friends, write them down, figure out where they're living now, figure out how to reach them, and be the proactive one. Be the one to reach out and say, hey, how have you been? How do we get together? And, when we see people just activate those basic, pretty simple steps, we get reports all the time of just, wow, this has been the most energizing thing I've done, is just be the proactive one instead of sitting back waiting and hoping somebody else is going to stumble into my world.
Yeah, which also is going to lead to the health perspective as well, right? Because that's one of the biggest things that I have seen in my own life with people that have retired around me, is that unfortunately they're just not working out as much or doing what they were doing, and they're very active potentially on their job, and then all of a sudden they're dealing with just doctors all the time, right? Just health issues. And I'm like, well, how does that dramatically change after being so healthy for so long, and then you finally get to retirement age, and then out of nowhere, I mean, is it just because you have time to analyze these things now, and that's why that part kicks in?
I think it's isolation. I really do. I think there is something about connection to other people that we're wired for as human beings, and work gives us that. It forces us out into the world every day, and I think we even saw during COVID when we were all, less connected. It was hard on people, and we're finally getting back to sort of a more normal cadence of being outside in the world, interacting. And even it's the little interactions every day with just the folks you run into along the way at your cafe or your newsstand or wherever it is you pop in. And to us, those really add up. And so the key word that we focus on is isolation. Avoid that. And if you notice you're becoming isolated, don't let the inertia of that kind of suck you in, because it is the getting out, being connected, making the effort that's what's got all the magic in it. And you're right that if you just continue to focus on, how your health is going downhill or this or that, I mean, the next thing you know, that's all you're living, is an isolated experience where you're doing nothing but managing, health issues. So it's just so much about being the one with the intention and being the one with, the next step that it's like I'm taking the steps. I'm not waiting for these things to happen.
Yeah, that's a really great point too. And I love that we're kind of diving into some of this stuff, but I don't want to give away all of Elizabeth's secrets because clearly you have a coaching business and I need people to engage with your website too. So I'm going to tell people they can go to Encore. It's ENCORACO.com. Yes. Yeah.
You got it.
EncoreCo.com. And then you can meet Elizabeth and her team over there and talk to them a little bit further. But I want to dive into this book because I think this is so cool that you've written this book. I really do appreciate authors. And the reason why I do so much is that you've now spent some time learning these things from firsthand knowledge, you yourself, then created a business, then dove in and educated yourself on a perspective. And then it's like the shortcut version to just go read the book and learn as much as we can from what you've already learned. And Encore truly is that. It's a very cool book. I was able to read like a page or two of it before you and I were able to connect. And then I really kind of like the idea that this is really focused on something that is kind of niche. I don't know about a lot of books where they talk about, how to thrive in retirement and how to make this massive switch in your life and be educated about that change. So what I want to dive into, which I'm always curious about, Elizabeth, how did you find the time to write the book? Besides, like there's always a time consumption part of this. So how did you analyze like getting this created and building a time schedule to make sure this happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I think anyway, what I discovered about writing this book was I finally had to get almost desperate to say what I wanted to say, and there had been years literally where I had this intention to write a book, and I kept thinking, I should write a book, because so many people, when they heard, what I did professionally, would say, oh, I know 5 people that need to talk to you. It just seemed like such a constant issue. And so and it was finally the tipping point sort of came when I realized, like, if I don't write this book, I'm going to go crazy. Like, I need to write it. I needed to write it. And so then what I realized was I also needed that protected time you're talking about. So luckily, I live in the Southwest where the sun's up very, very early. And so I just started getting up at the literal crack of dawn and trying to give myself a couple hours to focus on this project, which wasn't always productive, right? Some days nothing comes. Other days you work, you get twice as much done. But it was really prioritizing it. And I think that's like anything, right? If you want it to happen, you have to prioritize it, which means you have to give it time and you have to make that time non-negotiable. So that is one sort of thing that led me into finally getting enough momentum that I was off and running. And then, the other thing I find for myself anyways, I like collaborators. And so I found some folks to help me with this project. I had, somebody interview me to help get some of these ideas out of my head. I found a great editor to work with me on, the structure. And all of those, extra hands, if you will, really made a big difference because, of course, if I committed to get something done by a certain time and someone else is on the other side of that commitment, I will get it done. Right. I'll break that rule with myself all the time, but no one else.
That makes sense. So then, okay, so obviously finding the time is a tough part of getting a book completed, but then there's another layer to this where you have to decide what information is going to go in here. And I'm in the midst of writing a book, which is why I'm diving into some of this stuff with you.
Whoa.
So there's so many things. There's a huge list of things that I want to put in this thing. And I'm like, how do I analyze this and make sure it flows correctly? Which stories are important? Which information is important? So from your perspective, like, how did you analyze what was really important for this? I mean, is there just like 10 key topics to retirement that you were able to isolate, or was there more stuff in here that people would kind of be excited about?
Yeah, well, it's a great way. It's a good question. And, I think this is where my legal background was relevant again, because I was not a courtroom lawyer. I was a transactional lawyer. So I did deals and big complicated deals, which requires you to think about the structure of the deal first and how are you going to arrange all these entities and pieces. So the way I approached it was with structure. I was like, okay, I think my readers would like to know where they're going and what are the things we're going to cover. So I actually thought about my table of contents well before I really wrote that much. I mean, I had some things written, but they were very disorganized. And it was when I forced myself to almost build that outline of topics and thought about, well, how do I group these things together? And it occurred to me, I think if you've looked at the book at all, it's really got 4 parts. One is, why is retirement hard? Like, why? And I thought about, well, what is it that we talk about with our clients, and how do I organize those topics? And then what are the keys to getting it right? Well, you got to bridge your identity and restructure your life. So there were parts 2 and 3. And then part 4 was the final piece of, like, this is all nice theory, but how do I put it into action? How do I actually get this thing moving? So then I had my 4 parts, and it was much easier then to start plugging in stories and, pieces of wisdom and recommendations we give our clients into those 4 parts. And the next thing you know, the structure started coming together, and then it was so much easier to write, as opposed to just randomly writing, which is, it's hard to think when, at least for me, when everything's jumbled.
Yeah, I like that idea. It actually breaks it up into smaller projects, which is what I'm doing now. Is I've talked to enough authors, I've learned. So it's like, it's finally being able to kind of just take it down to like, okay, I'm going to really pinpoint 15 stories that I want to put into this book, and I'm going to isolate them in different sections, and then I'm going to be able to write these things out and kind of go through it, and then reread and then analyze. And that's kind of my new process right now. And so, it's cool that you also brought some people in, because I'm also working on that too. Like I have a really great person that is written tons of books. She's now a friend and going to be the editor of my book. Like as soon as we get to the end game, I have someone else who's a business professional who's helping me analyze my perspective and my points so that I don't sound like everybody else. So that's kind of an idea of being able to isolate it a little bit. Well, I think this is so cool. I'm really glad that you and I were able to connect, Elizabeth. I'm sure life is busy even in retirement with all this fun stuff you have going on. I think that the company is extremely cool. I have a lot of friends and people that I know that would be, great clients for you. And so I want to kind of share that around again. But Encore.com is the name of the company. People should go check that out. You guys do have some social media platforms too. And then go check out Encore, A Higher Achiever's Guide to Thriving in Retirement. It's available on Amazon. Most people go buy their books there. You can get it in Kindle, hardcover, paperback. It's all available. But I'm really glad that you and I were able to connect, talk about this topic. And maybe I'm a client too, honestly, because I really am focused on what happens 10 years from now with transitioning this company into something else so that I can kind of have a little bit more freedom. But it's not really about freedom for me. It's more about just having like a little bit more time to work on other projects, honestly. Yeah. And that's really what I'm focused on is what's the next phase. And I love that you said graduation. And that's the word that I'm going to start using on a regular basis, which is very cool.
Love it. Love it. Well, this has been a super fun conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the show. Please take a minute to head over to www.savfair.com and subscribe to our publication.